A semi-naked couple lay in bed. This is John and Alice, and they're supposed to be married. John sleepily reaches over Alice and turns off the alarm. They cuddle for a while longer before John insists on leaving. He doesn't want to be late for work. John shakily leaves for work on his bicycle. He arrives at the creatively named Laurel Springs office building. Everyone's at their desks as John rolls up his sleeves to begin work. A coworker in the adjacent cubicle greets him. Back at home, Alice preps for her interview, going through her answers as she dresses up. John, on his part, is already in the thick of things as a telemarketer. His boss passes by and observes John, who has just flunked a call. The boss offers some advice as John blames everything on the economy, but the boss has made his point and moves on. Alice steps up, facing 4 interviewers, as she gives her pitch. Ultimately, they reject her. At home, she goes through the classified section for job openings when Arnie knocks on her door, requesting the rent 3 days early. He seems to be attracted to Alice, checking her out as she bends over to pick something up. John is seen returning from work as Alice hands a check to Arnie. He frightens John as he leaves. John plays a video game as Alice gets herself up to speed on the status of their finances. To put it directly, the situation's not good. She discovers that after Arnie cashes their rent check, they would be overdrawn by $45. Ouch. That evening, John and Alice head downtown for a get-together with old school friends. When they arrive, they realize they're underdressed for the occasion. They both make comments about a woman named Peyton as they walk through the crowd. John tries to talk with Ricky, who's getting some drinks at the bar, but is ignored. Alice calls out to Louise, and, by extension, Chuck from across the room. They hug and Chuck excuses himself to go to the bar. Chuck meets John at the bar while Alice and Louise decide to get drunk. At some point, everyone's dancing or showing off their moves. The night probably ends on a high because John pukes in the kitchen sink the following morning. They decide to head out for some grocery shopping. As they drive, John asks Alice about her interview, but suddenly a truck hits them, and they spin. However, they're unscathed, and the police are already there to question everyone involved. Alice spots an older woman picking up a pot and returning inside her antique shop from her side eye. She excuses herself and follows the old woman. Alice pretends she's just browsing the items. John meets up with her and informs her that the car is fine, but she insists they browse the shop a little longer. The old woman shows Alice a picture from her pendant, but then the phone rings, and she has to pick it up. Alone again, Alice walks towards the teapot. Impulsively, she steals the teapot and runs out of the shop, making John her getaway driver. But John doesn't mind. That night, Alice punches John in their sleep. Again, John doesn't mind. Interesting relationship. The next day, John is back at work, spending his lunch break talking with his coworker about their boss's escapades away from his wife, when she happens to pass by. At home, Alice is preparing for yet another interview. She uses a straightening iron to fix her hair but accidentally burns her scalp. And strangely enough, the teapot rattles. Turns out that the brass teapot is a sort of money pot. Alice tests her theory, burning herself again with the straightening iron, kicking a table, and even punching through the kitchen cabinet. Every time she experiences pain, the money pot gives back. In this case, cold hard cash. Meanwhile, John's in his boss's office and spots some red underwear amongst the files. His boss is trying to tell John that he's underperforming and that the company is downsizing, but eventually he gets to the point and fires John. John gets home to find the house ransacked. He calls out for Alice and eventually finds her, slightly unconscious in the bedroom. She insists that she's fine, introducing him to the magical brass teapot and explains everything. To prove her point, she slaps him, and out comes money. But it takes 2 more attempts to convince him. A very interesting relationship. The next day, Alice wakes up to a note. John has taken the teapot and is planning to get rid of it. He gets back to the store where Alice first found it, but it's a dead end, literally. Then he tries to sell it at an antique sale show, where a curator tells him on camera that the teapot is incredibly rare. Meanwhile, a certain Dr. Ling just so happens to be watching the antique show live. His attention is drawn to the item, and he moves to thumbtack the location of the find on his wall map. The curator at the show tags the teapot for potential buyers at $5,000. Back at home, John makes Alice promise that they won't go too far with this. But soon they're injuring themselves in all manners of ways to rack up the cheddar. They place their hands over the stove fire. Alice gets a painful waxing. John gets his tooth removed by a dentist the old-fashioned way. They both get a few painful tattoos. In the end, they're a couple $100,000 richer. Alice would like to take the money to the bank, but John shows his typically cautious side by citing the IRS and their issues. It doesn't end there, though. Alice seems to want some fetish love as she seduces John and tells him to spank her. It's a bit to make all the accrued money even out at $200,000. So naturally, the proceedings begin as they take turns spanking each other. John and Alice are hidden in the tall grass at Trudy's place, Alice's mom, as they smoke some drugs. Mary, Alice's sister, is also there with her husband and children. Trudy wants to know what John's up to, and clearly doesn't seem to like him very much. The subject of bringing kids into the world is raised, and Alice tries to defend her position. Back at home, Alice and John are making themselves comfortable and playfully planning for the future when they hear a knock at the door. Alice hides the teapot under some cushions as John answers the door and is immediately assaulted by two Jewish men. They saw the pot on the TV and want to know where it is. They claim it belongs to their grandmother of blessed memory, the same old woman at the antique store. They proceed to beat up John in their quest to retrieve the pot, but Alice lies and pays them off with John's pain money. The couple decides to want to know more about the brass teapot and go to the library. They find a book, and while John's distracted, Alice tears out a pivotal page so he can't get some more information. Eventually, they decide to throw caution to the wind. They buy a house, an expensive car, some jewelry, and a few dresses for Alice. They even host a party at the new house. Alice is now friends with Peyton, their new neighbor. Their old friends, Chuck and Louise, are also invited, and at some point Dr. Ling comes calling. He tries to warn them about the pot, saying they may be in some danger. John wants to hear him out, but Alice vehemently shuts that door. While at dinner with Ricky and Peyton, Alice and John haggle about who gets to take the pain to make the money for the bill they insist on paying. Back at home, Alice wants to know how John's vodka business idea is doing so far. Meanwhile, Arnie watches them through a window and knocks at their door. He lets himself in and manages to grab the teapot from Alice as he runs. They both frantically beg him to return the pot, but he tosses it into the street and tries to run it over. It turns out that the pot is so powerful that it doesn't get a scratch whatsoever. Phew. They're relieved or fearful. Alice and John visit Dr. Ling, who begins to explain to them the mysteries of the pot. He tells them that it can be dangerous, but Alice especially doesn't trust him and insists that they keep it. Soon enough, Alice is being wheeled around the mall in a chair by Peyton. She has a cast on her leg from an alleged skiing trip. They accidentally meet Louise there, working a second job at a smoothie place, and they order their smoothies in spite of the awkwardness. In the middle of the night, Alice is woken up by a noise. She alerts John, and they find it's the Jewish men again, carting away all that cash that was stored in the toilet. John can't stop them. Neither can Alice. Even if she tries, they're both knocked out as the Jewish men escape. In the morning, Alice is in emotional pain about their money. But that type of pain doesn't turn into money, right? Peyton's at their door, complaining about their badly maintained front lawn. John comes downstairs with a hammer, planning to inflict some pain for money, as the pot is rewarding less and less money lately. However, John can't do it. He's not in the mood to hurt himself, so he has an idea. They both head to a bar across town. John asks to see the most troublesome patron there, takes 2 shots of liquor, and proceeds to provoke a man in the hope of being assaulted. Sure enough, he gets the beating he wants. The next day, he takes out the trash with tampons stuffed up his bloody nose, and Ricky makes fun of him. Mr. Ling suddenly appears from nowhere, trying to warn John once again. John goes over to Chuck's workplace while Alice figures out a loophole. She can cash in on literally anybody else's pain, as far as they have had contact with the teapot. From random skateboarders to mixed martial arts fighters, to even childbearing mothers. As such, the money begins to pile up again. As they drive through town, Alice is on edge. John reminds her of their decision to stop if things start to get out of hand. But Alice even tries to run down a homeless person crossing the road. Frustrated by John's warnings, Alice storms out of the car. A short time later, Alice discovers that emotional pain also works the brass teapot. She tries her theory on John, and the pot pays up. She then urges John to do the same to her, suggesting he try a dark relationship secret on her. He refuses at first, but then confesses to an indiscretion. Bad move. Alice is obviously hurt, but the pot pays. Alice admits it was a good move. On opposite sides of the kitchen table, Alice and John throw marital jabs at each other as the pot pays out some ka-ching. It gets to the point where Alice confesses to being with Arnie 3 years ago, infuriating John, who drives to Arnie's place and confronts him. While they argue, Arnie picks up the teapot, and you can tell it has an effect on him. John and Alice drive away, leaving him to handle his scorned girlfriend. Poor guy. Literally. Didn't even get paid for it. Back at the house, John and Alice go for a walk in their neighborhood. Alice gets a thought. They could capitalize on other people's emotional pain too. From Peyton and Ricky to John's former boss and his fetish. Then they decide on the big one. Mary, Alice's sister, has a secret. Their first son's father is not her husband. They visit Mary, and just when they're about to spill the beans, Alice changes her mind last minute, averting a catastrophic disaster. Back at home, Alice is unhappy that she changed her mind and insists on hitting $1 million before they get rid of that teapot. She suggests they take out a criminal, which would be a big score. John tries to come to a compromise, but he can't seem to pull it off. Later, they dig graves for their would-be victim, but John attempts to talk Alice out of it. They argue a little, and John walks away, pestered repeatedly by a fly. He walks down to Dr. Ling's motel room and asks for help, but Dr. Ling already senses it's too late and tells John that irrespective of what happens, he'll continue to chase down that pot like his ancestors before him. Back at the house, Alice showers. John takes the opportunity to grab the teapot, placing the torn library book page on the bed for Alice to see. John makes her promise to lose the teapot, but she hesitates. To reinforce his point, he falls through the window to his apparent death. Alice rushes downstairs to be by his side and she cries. But it's only a well-orchestrated hoax, or a risky near-death maneuver. Whatever the case, John soon recovers, and he made her pinky swear. That night, John and Alice sleep when Arnie breaks into their house and steals the teapot. Maybe it's a good thing that he's taken it off their hands. But John sees things differently, and is determined to do the right thing, personally handing it over to Dr. Ling. The next day, they arrive to Arnie's place, stepping into the house through the open door. Inside, they see blood-soaked tissues all over the house. Arnie eventually appears with a gun and bruises all over his body. John asks him for the teapot, but Arnie spits in his face. A physical fight ensues. Just then, Arnie's lady appears with a gun and seizes the advantage, ordering Alice and John to kneel. They're planning to kill them for money. Suddenly, the two former Jewish men arrive. They argue back and forth with Arnie, and then the bullets start flying. John and Alice hide behind a couch. Soon it's over. And John takes a peek. There's money everywhere, and 4 dead bodies, but John and Alice are determined to get rid of the brass teapot. About time, don't you think? When they step outside Arnie's house, Dr. Ling's already waiting. They hand over the teapot to him, as he says a few words. John and Alice hold hands as they watch him leave. Louise goes through her mailbox as her husband Chuck waters the lawn in the background. She finds a letter with a check for $250,000 and rushes towards Chuck in celebration. Apparently, it's a gift from you-know-who. John and Alice drive cross-country now, and Alice is pregnant. They're actually happy. Meanwhile, Dr. Ling's on a ferry boat carrying the infamous brass teapot to its ultimate resting place. As the sun sets on the horizon, he drops it into the sea, and it sinks.